So, welcome to the podcast, Caitlin.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
Can you share your background and how you got into the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. My professional training is as a registered dietitian, which I don't know how familiar your listeners are to that credential process, but it's a little bit different than just being a nutritionist. You'd actually have to have a science based degree, do additional training outside of school, and then sit for an exam. We have a national board that kind of governs what we can do and what we can't do, and additional continuing education requirements that are kind of associated with it. So, registered dietitians are licensed to be able to work in hospitals, and we do the calculations for like if you were to need to be fed into your bloodstream, we're the ones that kind of determine what that is and how it's delivered, all the way to teaching you what to eat. And lots of us work in schools and work in food service. There's kind of like a wide range of what a dietitian can do. And frankly, I decided to become a dietitian because I personally was diagnosed with PCOS in my early adulthood and was given very narrow resources on how to manage the condition. And at diagnosis, had been told PCOS is the number one reason why women can't have children. And I was like 18 at the time. I mean, I wasn't really ready to have children for where I was in my life and who I was seeing. But it was a hit to me. It was a pretty hard blow because I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up at that point, but I knew I wanted to be a mom someday. And I felt like the doctor was just kind of slashing that dream right out the gate. And I asked, like, how can I treat this? And he basically offered me metformin and a birth control pill that I had just gone off of. And I thought there's just got to be another way. What brought me to the doctor was gaining 60 pounds in 3 months while training for a marathon. Like, it didn't make sense. So something was wrong. Something hormonally was really wrong. And what I didn't realize was kind of in that period of time, I had also gone off the pill, and things that had been masking my symptoms were no longer masking my symptoms. And that really brought me kind of to more natural world of healing, and started a journey that has led me to where I am today, where now I'm a dietitian. I have advanced functional medicine training that I got outside of school because I really felt like what I was taught in school didn't really give me the tools that I thought could help me not only treat myself but help others with a similar path as my own. And now I almost exclusively treat PCOS and fertility.
Hmm.
And that niche and kind of that narrowness in my practice came about because once I got married, my husband and I did in fact struggle to conceive. Um, Although we did finally about 3 years into our journey, and now I'm pregnant with our third baby. So we figured it out.
Hmm.
And now I help other women figure it out.
Awesome. It's funny because your story is like my story. And what's really crazy is doing what I do. I know what PCOS is, but I never, for whatever reason, you cannot see yourself. I never really put the
Mhm.
dots or like figured it out because I used to have very irregular periods. I was never diagnosed with
Mhm.
PCOS, but I'm like, obviously I had that, and then I had hirsutism and acne, and I had all the things. And but it was like, even then, I was like, I never was diagnosed with PCOS, but I'm like, I don't know what took me so long, but I'm like, I had PCOS. It just kind of like finally dawned on me, even though I know when I see other
Mhm.
people, it's like
Yeah.
when you actually look back at yourself, you don't
Yeah.
make
Makes
sense of it. But yeah, and the same thing, I
Mhm.
got given birth control pills, and
Mhm.
that was pretty much the band-aid that I got for many
Mhm.
years, and it was a very similar thing, and it's very frustrating. But yeah, if had I been told the same thing that you were told, it would have been devastating,
Oh yeah.
because that's what they
Mhm.
knew, and
Like,
that's what
yeah,
they assume.
which is not what PCOS is. That might be
Yeah,
a statistic that
right.
it may be the leading cause of anovulatory infertility, which is a way more science-based way of saying what he said to me,
Yeah,
and maybe a little bit better bedside manner, but it's treatable, and it's very treatable.
it is very
And
treatable.
What he didn't tell me was I could spend the next decade working on my diet and lifestyle and manage it naturally, or I could go on the pill, like he told me, and then come back when I wanted to get pregnant, whenever that was, and then struggle. So I intuitively knew there had to be more and kind of started searching that out. But so many women, it's like, well, come back when you're ready to get pregnant. And not only is that mismanagement, I think, of handling a patient in a very holistic way, but PCOS ups your risk for fatty liver disease. It increases
Hmm.
your risk for cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
It's like the insulin resistance that's underlying for so many of us makes it really hard for us to manage our weight and all the
Hmm.
other myriad of things that go with it. It's not just about having babies. And to
Right.
just pin it
Totally.
as that gynecologic thing, you totally miss the boat of helping
Hmm.
treat the rest of the individuals sitting in front of you.
Totally. And it also, it's interesting because I have type 2 diabetes in my family.
Mhm.
Not myself, obviously, but it's those tendencies. Those are all
Exactly.
factors
And
that
maybe you would have if you had, had a different journey to this point.
exactly. And that's why I
Mhm.
love epigenetics, because we have choice. I think that that's what
Mhm.
we're realizing, is that we actually have choice and we can really go different paths. And a lot
Mhm.
of times the way the doctors and many great doctors, but the way they're trained sometimes is it's either this or it's that, or if they have these kind of things, there's no cure. And
Right.
yeah, there's no like a quick fix or cure per se, but a lot of these things can actually go a completely different route and go into remission. And that's what
Mhm.
a lot of people don't realize, or at least their hope gets taken away when they speak to people or professionals and they're telling them this is pretty much what your path's going to look like.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I had a patient yesterday that wrote to me and said, "Hey, I went to the doctor again. And he basically told me, PCOS was just going to affect the rest of my life, and I better start acting like I'm allergic to carbs and sweets." And I was like, wow. First of
Yeah,
all, he should not be giving you diet advice. But
right.
second of all, like, it, I have PCOS and my hirsutism is really well managed at this point. My weight is really well managed at this point. It took me years to get here. It took really tinkering with things. As stress comes up in life or different
Hmm.
challenges come up, things can exacerbate. And then I kind of have to go back to the drawing board and the fundamentals, but
Right.
it's very manageable. And
Hmm.
if we don't help people get to that root cause, this more functional medicine approach, where we can give them choice, how could you ever be successful against something that has such a huge metabolic syndrome kind of component to it? You're
Yeah.
basically, if you don't give them anything beyond birth control or metformin or spironolactone, which is basically what a doctor has to offer, um, y- you're really missing the boat. Like, let alone, let's talk about all the other things that overlap the impact of fertility, things like thyroid conditions,
Right.
or even just simple deficiencies like vitamin D deficiency. I see in almost every single person I treat. And yet it's like pulling hair out to get a
Yeah.
doctor to test for it.
Right. And so many people are deficient anyway in
Mhm.
vitamin D. It's even in
Even in
Florida.
Florida,
Yep.
even in Florida. I mean, I have tons
Yeah.
of patients from Florida,
Yeah.
and many of them, literally this week, somebody came in with a 60 or so nanogram per deciliter. And I was like, "Where do you live? And are you supplementing?" She's like, "I'm actually not supplementing. And I live in um, St. Augustine, and I make like a very, very intentional like effort to get sunshine every single day." She's like, "Until I did that, my levels were not this good." And she's one of the only people that I've ever seen be able to do it naturally and get into a range that I'm pretty satisfied with for fertility.
Yeah, and it's such a good point, because I think that people are so afraid of the sun because of the sun damage and what people say. But when you go early on, there's certain times of the day that it's actually safe and it's
Mhm.
good. You need sun. So it is
Mhm.
a supplement. It's like an extra part of us
Mhm.
being able to really absorb it. And I saw something, it was like a post on Instagram where they were saying to have it during the day. If you're going to take vitamin D, have it when the sun's out, because that's when your body typically
Would
absorbs it.
naturally. It's
So
interesting.
yeah, isn't
I
that
mean, and
interesting?
then there's so much that goes into that, right? Like, do you have adequate cholesterol? Do you have
Right.
magnesium that helps with not just the absorption, but
Absorption.
the
Yeah.
signaling and the transportation? It's
Right.
like you can get so granular with all of this, but yeah, but that makes sense.
Hmm.
Why not
Yeah.
take it during the day? And I've had a couple patients take it at night and it disrupt their sleep. So there's something to that.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And magnesium is another one. So many
Hmm.
people are deficient in magnesium, and it's not easy to test. And I think people
No.
think, oh, let's test it, but you can't really test it because it's in
Yeah.
your cells and it doesn't really show up in the blood. So
Hmm.
that's another thing that's so important. But in regards to PCOS, um, what are the thing with PCOS is that it shows up in so many different ways for so many different people. I think that
Hmm.
that's the thing. People have an idea of what PCOS looks like,
Hmm.
and you can't really pin it down because there's so many. I mean, there's different types. Yes, you can see the tendencies, but there's so many different types. So let's talk
Yeah, it really
about that.
presents differently. Yeah,
Yeah.
I literally right before this call just got off somebody with somebody that I'm sure every other practitioner just told her it's probably not PCOS because she was like 115 pounds and 5'7". Like
Mhm. Right.
she didn't look like your typical quote unquote PCOS patient. Because I think sometimes when you don't have that weight struggle piece of it, or you're not living in a bigger body, the doctors just go, "Hey, it's not, there's no underlying insulin resistance." And yet, this patient I was just looking at, her insulin was super high, her blood
Mhm.
sugar was normal, but it was taking a lot of insulin to get normal blood sugar for her. And there was very obviously insulin resistance underlying. And
Mhm.
so, even though she wasn't in a bigger body and struggling with weight, it was definitely a piece of the puzzle for her. So yes, PCOS presents in a lot of different ways. And I've learned to listen to more than just what my eyes can see,
Mhm.
looking at thorough lab work, assessing symptoms. So tell me about your cycle. Your cycle can tell us a lot. Tell me about what symptoms you're struggling with. Is it hirsutism, so hair in your body? And particularly with PCOS, I see that it mostly follows kind of like a midline pattern. It's on chin and neck. It's down the chest, usually around the nipples, from the belly button down to the groin, or even on like the inside part of somebody's thigh, where
Mhm.
it's thicker, more like pubic hair that you wouldn't expect outside of the pubic region. Um, or hair loss, and yet some of these things overlap with other conditions. So getting a practitioner that's very curious about you and asking a lot of questions and willing to rule out other things is really critical to get an accurate diagnosis, because there's other things that look like PCOS, that quack like PCOS, that aren't
Mhm.
PCOS,
Right.
and can affect things like fertility, can affect things like your weight, um, can affect other symptoms like hair loss. So, hypothyroidism's a really common reason to lose your hair as well. And you can also struggle with weight with it. So,
Mhm.
um, most of my patient population is fairly confident that they have PCOS based on a diagnosis or based on learning about it and struggling with fertility. And then they find me.
Yeah.
And so I dig into a lot of that piece of it, that irregular cycle or anovulation with a lot of my clients, because usually one of our number one goals is um, really optimizing preconception, getting them in the healthiest state we can for their body to be pregnant, so that they not just achieve pregnancy, but have a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby. Because nobody ever said, I just want to be pregnant. Like the goal is a baby, right? The goal is to be a healthy human
Right.
and have a baby, right? So optimizing preconception and getting them ovulating. Like you have to, if you're going to achieve pregnancy at home, you're not going to have advanced reproductive technology assistance. We have to get you ovulating.
Mhm.
And then we want to optimize things like your progesterone levels after ovulation so that you can hold a pregnancy if one were to occur. So there's a lot that I do in cycle tracking and education around that, which like definitely is on the fringe of my professional license as a dietitian, way more in the realm of like a fertility awareness educator. But I do that a lot with clients because I find for some they are ovulating and just the stars kind of haven't aligned with their fertile days and egg meeting sperm, with our cultural norms these days, and maybe not in the pandemic, but pre-pandemic, like one spouse traveling and just
Right.
life. Sometimes you could go 4 cycles and completely miss your fertile days, even if you were ovulating.
Right.
But
But high inflammation too, that can impact implantation.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's so much. And inflammation, high inflammation is a part of PCOS for so
Hmm.
many of us. And we test for that in my practice very regularly. And optimizing those things, you don't want to go into pregnancy with widespread chronic inflammation in your body. So
Right. No.
while we want you to get pregnant, like we want you to feel good in pregnancy, as good as you're going to feel, because pregnancy doesn't always feel good.
No, it does not.
So
Uh-huh.
there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah.
But what I've found, people are talking a lot about different PCOS types, like lean PCOS and adrenal PCOS and thyroid based PCOS and this and that. And what I find is that by and large, these things overlap. Like this person might have insulin resistance, but their stress levels are also through the roof and it's
Hmm.
driving their DHEAS up.
Right.
And that really didn't, in my opinion, have much to do with their insulin resistance. As soon as we brought their stress levels down, that particular androgen reacted. And so I it's not that I fight against kind of these categories. I think everybody wants a label because it makes them feel better about, like, okay, now I know what to do about it. Frankly, my approach isn't any different. Like, we need nutrient density, we need blood sugar balance, and we need to deal
Hmm.
with your specific hormonal imbalances.
Hmm.
End of the story. But we have to get to the bottom of what your specific hormonal imbalances are, because I've treated thousands of women with PCOS at this point, and every person's different.
Yeah, totally. Everybody has their own unique thing. And that's why diets, these fad diets, can work amazing for one person and like
Mhm.
be detrimental for another. And that's why it's so important to work with a dietitian because
Amen. I mean,
everybody needs something
ev-
completely different. One man's
totally.
food is another man's poison.
Exactly. I mean, I feel like keto and intermittent fasting is so huge right now for PCOS. And part of that is directed at the messaging around insulin resistance. And both of those things can improve insulin resistance, but they're also, in my opinion, not very fertility friendly,
Hmm.
and should not be just like mass prescribed to an
Totally. You
entire
need
population.
carbs. You need
You
carbs.
need carbs.
Yeah.
Your adrenals need carbs.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, and all the micronutrients that come packaged from nature with those carbohydrates. Like it's
Hmm.
I think in America, particularly in our culture, and even my profession by and large, it's like we get very granular. Like, let's talk about the vitamin D. Let's
Hmm.
talk about the vitamin C and the zinc and then this. And we've gotten very far away from just talking about whole foods
Right.
and what a nourishing diet looks like. And we get hyper focused on if we could just fix this one thing. And so everybody just wants to be able to take a pill for that one thing. And
Right.
sometimes, well, most of the time, it's better delivered through real food anyway. Your body recognizes it, just like your recommendation of what you saw on Instagram, taking vitamin D when your body would have naturally seen vitamin D.
Yeah.
If your body can see it as what it is from nature, typically you do a little bit of a better job accessing it and utilizing it.
Yeah, totally. And that's one of the reasons I love whole food supplements
Mhm.
for prenatals. It's more compatible with your body.
Yeah, I straddle the line a little bit there sometimes because
Mhm.
I find some of the whole food supplements, like the amount of broccoli you need to get enough like of this one specific vitamin is so
Mhm.
much that sometimes the amounts that I find in the whole food supplements, it's just my personal practitioner opinion.
Meaning like having to take more pills.
Yeah, like sometimes the actual supplement is low in the overall
I
needs
got
and
it.
actually like repleting what the person needs, or setting them up for
Right.
having enough in pregnancy. Like when you compare prenatal against prenatal, just sometimes things that I find are really important, like
Yeah.
choline,
Right.
really low in a whole food prenatal. And so sometimes this is why you want a good practitioner on your team, because if that's your preference, then we just may need to make sure you're eating enough eggs in your diet, or
Right.
just covering and making sure your bases are fully covered. I think I really respect a dietitian who's in the kind of functional medicine and prenatal world, Ayla Withy Bomber. She made a prenatal called Full Circle Prenatal. And I
Mm-hmm.
learned a lot from her in her approach to just how she even designed that supplement.
Mm-hmm.
In that, because she's definitely like a
So
food
that's one
first
you like, the
person.
full circle
I
prenatal?
love Full Circle,
Yeah.
partly because it has 4,000 IUs of vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
It does
Oh,
not
that's
have
great.
iron. Yeah. I mean, there's hardly another prenatal on the market. There's somebody that copied her formula that has 4,000 IUs of vitamin D,
Mm-hmm.
who shall remain
So they don't
nameless
have to,
during the
because I
podcast.
usually always tell them to get an extra supplement of vitamin D because most of the time it doesn't have enough.
Yeah. Oftentimes it doesn't have enough. So, um, and her product has a lot of, has, I want to say at least 300 milligrams of choline. So some of these like really popular brands of prenatals that are highly marketed right now, um, they have things like choline, but it's like 50 milligrams,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not getting enough typically in your diet plus that to
Mm-hmm.
support what we know that you need for neural tube development now in preconception and in pregnancy. And so
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot from how she designed that. And because I too used to believe like, hey, if we could do a whole food supplement, always that's a better option,
Mm-hmm.
especially because I'm a food first person. Like if I can get you to eat it, I want you to eat it. I don't want you to
Yeah.
take it in a pill. Um, but I just, after learning and taking some trainings with her, I've changed my tune a little bit on that with prenatals,
Right.
because your needs for so many of these things are just so much greater in pregnancy, and our
Yeah.
soils are so depleted.
It's true. That's true. So you can't eat the way we used to eat,
You
so
can't,
that's why we need
even if you
supplements
wanted
now.
to.
Yeah,
Even if you wanted to, you
it's
couldn't.
true.
Not in America anyway. There
Yeah,
might
that's
be
something to really think
places.
about because people say, oh, I can eat my food. Why do I need all the supplements? What we need today is a lot different than what we needed before when our food was rich with
Mhm.
nutrients because the
Where they didn't
soils were
just,
not depleted.
yeah, where they didn't just like do corn crop after corn crop after corn crop and never
Yeah,
let livestock walk on it. I mean, we could
right.
do a whole podcast on
On
regenerative
that.
agriculture and
Yeah,
how much it's needed, but yes, I mean, and that can feel very doom and gloomy, like, geez, so I'm never going to get enough from my food and I'm always going to need supplements, but you just got to do the best that you can. And I, particularly in preconception and fertility,
hmm,
like, yes, I want you healthy and optimal of all these things your whole life, but like, this is a really sacred time growing a
it
human
really
inside of
is
you and
big time.
prepping for that. This is
Yeah.
the time to like nail it, right? Like,
Yes. Yes, because it takes so much energy to reproduce. It takes so much energy to get there. And today I just had a conversation with my patient and she said, yeah, she's like, it's a lot of pills. And I go, listen, it's not forever.
mhm,
You're preparing your body to hold another being, so you need a lot of energy. And I was explaining to her the whole soil
mhm.
depletion.
Absolutely. And I think too, in a case of, if we're talking about PCOS and fertility, there are certain metabolic and genetic predispositions we have for certain things. For instance, inositol is like a frontline supplement that I use.
Yeah.
We overconvert one form of it to
Hmm.
another, myoinositol to D-chiro. And in the follicle, in the egg, that's really important. And
Yeah.
so supplementing extra myoinositol can be a huge game changer for egg
And also
quality to get you ovulate.
during
Yes.
pregnancy, into pregnancy to,
Lower your risk
for
of
gestate,
gestational diabetes. Yes.
exactly. And also, what I did hear was that it's actually better to use than metformin in some
Amen.
cases
Yep.
because it actually helps pregnancy. The rate of pregnancies were higher with those that have done inositol
Mhm.
versus metformin.
And there's some emerging research on metformin that it's doing some damage to our mitochondrial cells,
Oh,
particularly in our
yeah, we
liver,
need
that like,
those. We need those.
do you want to expose your baby to that? I mean,
Yeah.
I have a little bit of a belief that if metformin helped you get pregnant, it might be a better option to stay on in early pregnancy and switch to myoinositol. Just after seeing some things. But I with a PCOS patient, if it took myoinositol to get pregnant, or if it took metformin to get pregnant, it's definitely worth staying on early pregnancy if you can. The other benefit of inositol over metformin, though, in my opinion, other than
Hmm.
like solid research that they go head to head
Hmm.
and myoinositol performs as well, is
Hmm.
that it typically doesn't come with the side effects that a lot of
Right.
people experience
Right.
on metformin. And so,
Loose stool and yeah.
yeah, when I took it, I felt like I was on a boat all the time, like world spinning,
Hmm.
nausea, diarrhea,
Oh
like
God,
just
fun. That sounds
yeah, it was terrible. But you'll do anything to get pregnant. And
true.
that's the other thing I'm sure you see in your practice is like you tell a woman to dance outside naked in the rain
Yep.
on the third Sunday of the month and
They're
that'll
the
get her
most
pregnant.
compliant
They will do
patients.
anything. They
Yeah.
will. And it leaves them very open to being taken advantage of in the marketplace.
Hmm.
And so I think getting a practitioner that really uses evidence-based research like yourself, like knowing, hey, not only do you need an inositol to get pregnant, but you should stay on it. It's going to lower your risk of GD and pregnancy. It's a big deal. And yes, but I'm kind of digressing. You'll do anything to get pregnant. I would
Yeah.
have felt like that on a boat forever if you told me it would get me a baby.
Yeah, totally. 100%. And so there's this also, initially I've done a lot of different trainings, but one of them said that it's good to get the inositol with D-chiro, my inositol with D-chiro. And then now I'm hearing not so much.
Yeah, you want my
So
opinion on it?
yes, I want your
I feel
opinion.
like this is a really hot topic.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got to think about what's going on in the cell. And particularly if we're talking about treating fertility, what's going on in the follicle. Research shows that a 40-to-1 combo of myo-inositol, so 40 parts myo-inositol, 1 part D-chiro,
Mm-hmm.
or myo-inositol 100% at a dose of 4 grams per day, either blend, all
Mm-hmm.
myo-inositol or the blend, both help with insulin resistance, both help with lowering testosterone, both help with ovulation rates. We have more research on all myo-inositol than we
Mm-hmm.
do this myo-D-chiro blend. And the
Right.
2 studies that we have on the myo-D-chiro blend are very small. So when you look at medical research, sometimes we just look at what the headlines show in the news,
It's
right?
true. Yeah.
But when you actually look at the research, we're looking at like study participants. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say like 40 subjects versus 43 in another group, like comparing myo-inositol to only myo-inositol to myo and D-chiro. The strength of the studies aren't great. So while
Yeah.
they are, I would call them preliminary. We need bigger studies.
Yeah.
Um, we need some of the variables taken out. Because the other thing about PCOS when you're doing research is you can have polycystic ovaries and an irregular cycle. You can have polycystic ovaries and high testosterone. You cannot have polycystic ovaries. You can have an irregular cycle and signs of high androgens.
Right.
So the research, when you're looking at it, sometimes I wonder, should we be looking at this 40-to-1 versus all myo on anovulatory infertile patients alone, right?
Right.
Like, and then we should stratify it. Let's look at it in a population of people that are ovulating, and maybe it's just impacting their egg quality or their progesterone production because the egg quality is improved. And that's the type of research we need and we don't have.
Right.
So in my practice, I am much more comfortable based on the balance of research that we have that myo-inositol alone, even though there's these 2 smaller studies that said the blend performed a little bit better,
Mm-hmm.
I'm more comfortable with it and I see it work a lot better. A lot of times people come to me on these popular supplements like Ovasitol, which is
Mm-hmm.
highly marketed.
Yep.
VitaChic is kind of a newer one to market where it's utilizing this 40-to-1 blend. And I'm not against them taking it because in general, I think it's better than them not taking it.
Right.
But what I find is that companies are marking up these supplements because they have this like magical blend and magical ratio, and you can get just as much done with the myo-inositol on its
Right.
own. And I think the research by and large is a little bit more supportive of it. The one other thought I have on it is that in the follicle, if we're over converting from myo-inositol into D-chiro-inositol, and that's part of the issue
Right.
with our egg quality, why are we giving any D-chiro at all?
Yeah, no, no, I understand. I get that logic.
And the two supplements that, or the two studies that showed that Myo and Decairo blend was a little bit better is the ovulation rates were quicker,
Mm-hmm.
but the Myo only group performed just as well when you looked over like a 3-month period of time versus I want to say like a 2-month period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you step back and you know a little bit more about fertility, that makes sense even
Right.
because how long does it take for an egg to
Yeah,
mature and get to the point
exactly.
to be
That
ovulated?
3-month minimum. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's really premature to say anything before that anyway, because who knows what other factors were affecting that egg quality in those subjects.
And it's such a small it's such a small number of people.
Yeah, how can you
Yeah.
would never take a drug to market
Right.
based on that study.
Yeah, good
Um,
point. And
yeah.
what are your thoughts on what supplements do you like for my inositol?
Like brands.
Mm-hmm.
I use Protocol for Life Balance a lot. It's a big red bottle because it's like a 2.5-month supply for a 4-gram dosage.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fairly inexpensive, and it's a good brand,
Mm-hmm.
quality assured, third party tested, all the
Yeah.
things. It's one that you can get off of some of those
Full
practitioner supported,
script. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, the Full Script, or what's Emerson's version of that, Wellevate.
Yeah.
Get it on
Yeah.
both of them, and you can also get it off Amazon.
Yeah.
So I use my inositol a lot with fertility, even with PCOS. When somebody isn't, their goal isn't necessarily conception right now, but insulin resistance is underlying, because this supplement's so magical because
Mm-hmm.
it kind of affects both. It improves
It really
insulin
does. People
resistance.
feel better. They
Yeah,
feel a
their
difference.
cravings go down.
Yeah.
So a huge piece of insulin resistance for a lot of people is, this blood sugar roller coaster that you're often on, and the cravings that can oftentimes be associated with that. And if you can help that out, why not? And
Yeah.
myoinositol I see really helps with that. I use N-acetylcysteine a lot. It
Yeah.
also, it can help with cervical mucus, which we really want abundant and high
Mm-hmm.
quality. um, it helps boost egg quality, full of, great antioxidant support, and it also helps insulin resistance. So if I can ever find a supplement that like improves fertility slash I'm going to deal with some of the underlying metabolic issues,
Mm-hmm.
and I can cross off things in multiple categories, I'm definitely looking for that. So I use myoinositol and N-acetylcysteine a lot, magnesium oftentimes. I particularly think of magnesium when I see slow
I
bowels,
love magnesium. It's amazing for so much.
everything, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Everything.
you're struggling with sleep. Let's give you some magnesium.
Right.
Yeah.
Muscle pains,
Yeah. Let's give you some
cramps,
magnesium. Yeah, absolutely. And I find that's another great one to keep people on in pregnancy. It's safe in pregnancy.
Yeah, it's very supportive.
Absolutely. And with the PCOS population, and we're at a higher risk for preeclampsia, I've seen, at least in the rates of women I've helped get pregnant, we are way lower than what the statistics say is normal for incidence of preeclampsia. And I think
Mhm.
part of that is supplementing with magnesium pre-pregnancy and
'Cause
in
it helps with the blood pressure as
exactly.
well, relaxing the blood vessels and
Exactly. Yeah. So magnesium is one that I use a lot. Vitamin D, we talked a little bit about.
mhm.
I mean, whether I'm treating PCOS or even before I really narrowed my focus on that, I often, even living in California, had very high incidence of what I would call frank deficiency, which would be anything less than 30 nanograms per deciliter of vitamin D. But even like the functional medicine world looks at vitamin D in a more narrow lens. We want a more narrow, higher range. And kind of the Western medicine model is very happy to see 30 to 100. And for fertility, I want to see between 50 and 80.
Mhm.
And almost nobody walks through the
Same thing
door.
with thyroid.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
We want a much more narrow piece. And don't get me started on thyroid. We also want more testing. Will you just
I
give us a
know. They're
thorough
like, your
panel,
thyroid's
please?
fine. Your TSH is fine. It's like,
Your TSH is 4 and you've had 3 miscarriages. We're not
right.
going to dig any deeper. And you're
Exactly. We don't
like,
need to look at anything else.
the research for your listeners, anything above 2.5, if your TSH is above 2.5
Yep.
and you've had a miscarriage, they should be treating your thyroid. Like that is such low hanging fruit to
Yep.
optimize.
Yeah.
And yes, you
Can
can
make such
improve
a
it.
difference too.
You can improve it naturally, yes, but it takes a while. And if you're trying, the thing I know about fertility patients, they want to be pregnant yesterday.
Yeah.
So, um, advocate for yourself, get a different endocrinologist, find a naturopath that has prescribing rights, like get better care for your thyroid. If you've experienced pregnancy loss and your TSH is above 2.5, that might be part of it.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
important. And then another hot topic. What are your thoughts on gluten? Because that's a whole thing. Like people are like so either one way or another with this
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah. Especially with PCOS.
Yeah,
Or really, I kind of feel like, you start moving into integrative or functional medicine and you just find people that are like, everybody needs to be gluten free,
right.
or
Nobody
yeah,
needs
I've
to.
really I've changed my tune on this a little bit. I mean, when I was in college studying nutrition and seeing a naturopathic doctor for myself and really saw great strides of improvement in my PCOS, I was gluten and dairy free. I was also almond and cashew free. I was
Mhm.
also tomato free. Like we did food sensitivity testing on Caitlin.
Yeah,
And those were the foods that came up for Caitlin.
right.
And one thing that I really appreciated her approach, the naturopathic doctor that was treating me at the time, which I've carried on into my practice, is not this idea that those are your food sensitivities forever. Truly, for most people that have food sensitivities, there's something that's going on with your gut lining and the integrity of it. And so a lot of us call this leaky gut, where
Hmm.
food is crossing from the inside of your GI tract to your bloodstream or your lymph stream undigested. So think about like if I were to hand you an apple and I asked you to put that into your bloodstream, or I told you to chew it up and swallow it. It's like it's a really many times magnified example, but if you cut it up, it's easier for your body to recognize. So this idea of leaky gut where proteins in different food is passing into your bloodstream or your lymph stream in this less digested state where it doesn't go into your cell and get tagged and broken apart and metabolized more and sent specific places, your immune system is like hyper aware. Well, you have to calm your immune system down and you have to seal and heal your gut if you want to address food sensitivities. So, while I did remove a lot of foods, frankly, I got a lot of them back once I did some healing modalities for my gut.
Hmm. Right.
And I still can't eat cashews. Like, there's still things on that list that I had to pull out, and I didn't ever get them back. When I eat them, I don't feel good. um, my skin will flare up or there will be some sort of like external symptom of it. But by and large, I think that a lot of times the issue is the gut. And if we can heal the gut, the foods are more tolerated.
Right.
With gluten in particular, there's like a study that shows that it is fairly inflammatory for most people. I find by and large, like it is not the thing removing, like never have I ever said go gluten and dairy free and somebody got pregnant. Okay.
Hmm.
There's always other things that are frankly better optimized.
Hmm.
And I think it can be a very restrictive approach when there's so many other things we need to adjust in somebody's lifestyle. um, I think a lot of times people go gluten and dairy free and they feel better, but the difference is not necessarily the gluten and the dairy. It's like they were going through the Arby's drive through and then they were eating pizza
Right.
4 nights a week.
Good point.
When they cut out those foods and replaced it with other more nutrient dense foods, or they started cooking from home,
Right.
they started feeling better. And so was it the gluten and dairy, or was it just these other diet and lifestyle shifts?
Yeah.
There are instances where I pull dairy. If somebody has hypothyroidism, especially if they have Hashimoto's, I'll pull gluten like right
Yeah.
off the bat.
For
Let's
sure.
lower some inflammation. Why not? If somebody's presenting with acne, I'll tell them, let's do 4 weeks no dairy and just see how your body responds. We do have a little bit of research on that with PCOS. Um, Dairy in particular can be such a great source of protein. And eating
Right.
full fat dairy can be good for fertility. Now, it's
Yep.
not necessarily the dairy, it's the fat soluble vitamins in the full fat dairy that we know is more helpful. It's not really necessarily the dairy itself. But it can be such a great tool like Greek yogurt or cottage
Right.
cheese.
And yogurt, especially if there's something, well, yogurt has the enzymes, it has the good bacteria. So it's
Yeah,
easier to digest than other types of dairy.
exactly. Do I think people should drink milk? No, no. But if you're going to eat a cookie and you want to drink milk one night out of the month,
Right.
big deal. Like, that's not what I see in the population that I treat. It's not the end all be all. And frankly, like, I think we need more research on it. I think there is potential that 40% of the PCOS population might do better dairy free or
Right.
gluten free.
Yeah.
But until we have research, I'm very uncomfortable as a licensed practitioner to say everybody should be doing it. I think it's a very patient specific approach.
Yeah,
I'd
definitely.
say I sell an online course for PCOS fertility, and I'm very active in helping people customize what they do. And I'd say 20% of them I'm pulling gluten from. And
Hmm.
I'd say maybe 25% of them I'm pulling dairy from. And some of those may overlap, but it's not just because, like, there's a reason, because at least 20% of them are presenting with either we know it's Hashimoto's, we saw thyroid antibodies
Right.
elevated,
Yeah.
um, some sort of thyroid autoimmune response. Yeah, I'll pull gluten. Like, why
Yeah.
not? And but it's not like let's pull it and it's forever gone.
Right.
Hashimoto's, sometimes I'll say, unless you're in Paris and you're gonna have like the French bread, or something where it's like really worth it,
Mhm.
you're somebody that may need to avoid gluten for the long term. But
Right, because
um,
not all wheat is created equal. That's why in Europe it's a lot different. People don't really seem to
mhm.
have as many symptoms. And one thing I do say is if people do eat gluten and don't seem to have too much of a sensitivity, at least have it organic.
Less often, yes. And that's the thing about the American diet. It's like we think something's okay, then more is better. It's like, okay, well, let's have toast with our breakfast and a sandwich at lunch
Hmm.
and pasta with bread at
Right,
dinner. And so
totally.
gluten showed up multiple times at every meal. I
Right.
certainly don't endorse or recommend that. I think that there's so much space for more variety. And frankly,
Yep.
like, if you wanted my, like, what could everyone benefit from, it's high quality animal products and
Hmm.
way more vegetables. Like, almost every human with every condition could benefit from not eating cheap meat, cheap eggs, cheap dairy. Like, if
Hmm.
you're going to eat animal products, get the pasture raised eggs, get the
It really makes
grass
a
fed
difference in
beef.
inflammation in the body.
It absolutely does. The fat profiles of these animals that are raised on more natural to, like, their species diets,
Hmm.
like, cows didn't eat corn before we mega cropped corn. Okay.
Right.
Cows
Oh,
didn't eat soy
it's
before we did
crazy.
that. They ate, grass and
Yeah.
hay, and, they roamed. And the animal from a grass, the meat and the fat profile from a grass fed animal, like a cattle, it has way higher omega 3s, way less inflammatory omega 6s, that it's much closer to eating like a chicken breast
Hmm.
than its corn fed counterpart is to being just like a fried piece of meat. And
Right.
it tastes different. And that's the part that I find for a lot of Americans it's hard, because it's a little gamier. You, like, have to get used to it because it's not the same thing that they were getting at McDonald's, right? Which is probably
Right.
not
Totally.
your listener population, but it does taste a little bit different. um but so, should you cut out gluten? Some of you might need to. Most of you probably don't, but you probably benefit from finding 2 to 3 more cups of vegetables to eat in a day and
Right.
eating less but higher quality meat.
Yeah, and you bring a good point. I mean, variety. You can't go wrong with that. And a lot of times people start to develop food sensitivities from eating the same thing all the time.
Over and
And that's when you
over.
were saying if you get away from it for a little bit while, you can reintroduce it. But I think the body
Mhm.
starts to resist it if it's too much.
Absolutely. And I, I really progress over perfection is a big thing that I preach. Like
Yeah.
and I think in any health endeavor, we all are like very binary. It's all or nothing. We're in or out, we're out. It's white or black. I'm either on the diet or I'm off. And I would much rather say, like, hey, let's change nothing else, but let's get a high protein breakfast with vegetables in it for the next 2 weeks and see how you
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah, totally.
Let's make that one change. That one change may affect the rest of your day,
Right.
energy level wise, craving wise.
Yep.
It's like it has the potential to impact so much else. Progress over perfection. Let's crowd things off your plate versus villainizing this food and never eating a cookie again.
Yeah. Which makes you want to
Um,
eat it more.
Amen. And like you have teenage girls.
Yeah.
What's the quickest way to like raise a child with eating issues and body image issues is like over I don't know, over
Don't do this means do this.
well that
Or
and like, mom being hyper aware of those things. Like
yeah.
I have PCOS, I have insulin resistant PCOS. I don't feel good when I eat a lot of sugar, but I'm
Yeah.
very careful to every time there's ice cream at the table or somebody brings over cookies or something to not be like, no, I don't eat that in front of my two little girls
Hmm.
because I want them to be able to eat those things and not feel bad about themselves or think that
Hmm.
they're a bad food. How even our conversation about these foods or our bodies, like our language is really important around our children, which is a topic
Yeah,
for another day, I'm
I
sure.
know. It is. But yeah, it's more focusing on what to eat and enjoying
Exactly.
those good things. And then
hmm
everything kind of falls into place.
But what patient ever liked that approach? What patient was ever like, oh, that's so nice? They're like, no, tell me exactly what to eat. Tell me
Exactly.
exactly what not to eat. And frankly, those are not the patient, like that type of plan. You might be successful on a plan like that for a few weeks,
Exactly. It's not
but
sustainable.
it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So why don't we figure out what foods you like and you dislike and work with that and then optimize within that realm, right? So that I'm
Hmm.
not telling you like I just got off the phone with somebody who's like, I hate the taste of eggs. I'll eat them in something. If you give me a recipe with eggs in it, I'll eat it, but I'm not going to make a frittata or scramble some eggs for breakfast. What if I gave her a plan that was eggs every day, 6, 7 days a week? Like
Right.
2 weeks from now, she'll have gagged it
Sure.
down
Yeah.
and then she'll be sending me a big FU thank you letter. Like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not coming back. Right. So you have
Totally.
to optimize based
Yeah.
on the individual in front of you.
Totally. So if somebody wants to work with you and really, is drawn to your message and wants to work with you, how can they find you?
So I'm most active on Instagram. So my Instagram handle's at PCOS Fertility Nutrition. I also co-host a podcast with another functional medicine dietitian. It's called Food Freedom Fertility, and we talk about a range of topics around fertility and preconception. It's not just PCOS based. And we bring on experts, and it's a fun show. We try to laugh and keep it light, even in the midst of some kind of heavier topics, that's for sure. I'm currently 7 months pregnant, so I'm not taking on any new one on one patients right now. But I do have some online offerings website if people are interested at PCOSfertilitynutrition.com. We're just releasing a PCOS specific cycle tracking course, which is like a mini course and fairly inexpensive because there's some things in tracking your cycle that are different for PCOS that it's just helpful to have some specifics on. And then one thing that I'm really proud of that was more important to me during this pregnancy was having some sort of resource for women who conceived with PCOS but wanted to optimize their pregnancy. I have a lot of people that follow me that were writing like, hey, following you, I got pregnant, now what?
Right.
So we made a mini course on what labs to ask your doctor for, recipe suggestions, how to manage symptoms, how to lower your risk for things like preeclampsia and gestational diabetes. A lot of these people are like self supplementing, like what supplements you absolutely need to go off of when you're pregnant, what are safe to continue, just some really good general information. So those are new offerings this summer that I'm really happy to kind of round out, not just focusing on fertility, but once you are pregnant, or if you're not really ready to bite off the whole fertility thing, but you just want to start getting to know your cycle, we have some of these mini offerings available now.
Fantastic. Well,
Yeah.
Caitlin, this is a great conversation. I've learned a lot. I do what I do, but of course I learn about nutrition as part of it, but it's awesome picking a brain of a really good dietitian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I hope your listeners get something out of it. And we're always, I'm like number one proponent of getting acupuncture preconception,
Oh, it's
during
great.
pregnancy,
Yeah.
after you have your baby and you're dealing with postpartum issues. Like
Oh,
it
yeah.
is, um, it's up there on things that I constantly recommend. So it's nice to have a resource to point people to as well.
Yeah, and it's I always say it takes a village. We all
Mhm.
have our things, and I think all of those pieces make us whole, and it's like
Mhm.
all the different parts are so important. So thank you
Mhm.
again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.